There are people who move through crowded rooms like soft echoes, present but never fully heard. They smile when needed, nod on cue, and stand among others with a practiced stillness that almost blends into the walls. To most they appear calm, composed, the ones who never cause trouble. But inside there is a quiet ache, a gentle distance, a feeling of being close to everyone yet connected to no one. This loneliness is not the dramatic kind. It is subtle, almost polite. It forms when a person learns somewhere along the way that silence is safer than expression, that observation is easier than belonging, and that in a world full of voices, theirs is the one that can remain unspoken. This is the story of those who stay quiet in crowds, and the hidden loneliness they carry like a second skin. In every room, there is at least one person who drifts just slightly outside the circle of conversation. They stand close enough to be included, yet far enough to remain untouched by the noise. Their silence is not awkward. It is not loud. It is simply there. A thin layer of distance that softens their presence like a dim light in a bright hallway. Most people never notice them. Or if they do, they describe them with simple words. Calm, shy, introverted, reserved. But these labels miss the truth. Because quietness is not always a personality trait. Sometimes it is a habit, a skill, a survival mechanism shaped by years of watching rather than speaking. Quiet individuals rarely interrupt, rarely dominate space, rarely speak without thinking. They listen carefully, feel deeply, and observe more than anyone realizes. But beneath their composed expression, a subtle ache grows, one that even they struggle to name. It's the ache that comes from being physically present yet emotionally out of reach. You can see it in small moments, when they open their mouth to speak but the words retreat before escape, when laughter fills the room and their smile arrives a second late, when they stand in a group but feel like a visitor in someone else's world. Crowds don't scare them. People don't intimidate them. It is the feeling of not belonging, despite doing everything right, that truly hurts. Quiet individuals often become the mirrors of their environments. They tune themselves to whatever others need. A listener, a steady presence, a gentle nod in the middle of chaos. They carry conversations by absorbing them. They bring comfort by expecting nothing. They create peace by making themselves small. And yet, this very shrinking of the self becomes the birthplace of loneliness. Because eventually the world stops asking who they are. It stops wondering what they think. It assumes their silence means satisfaction, that their calm means contentment. And so the quiet person becomes a background character in their own life, spoken to but not spoken with. There is a particular kind of loneliness that forms when you are surrounded by people who like you, yet none of them truly know you. It is not the loneliness of isolation. It is the loneliness of invisibility. To others, the quiet person appears easygoing, low maintenance, unbothered. But inside, they often carry questions that echo through their mind long after the crowd disperses. Why do I feel far away from people who are right in front of me? Why do conversations feel like something I watch instead of enter? Why does my voice feel unnecessary even when I want to speak? These questions do not come from weakness. They come from awareness. From the constant internal scanning that quiet individuals do instinctively, monitoring the room, gauging the emotional temperature, deciding when it's safe to speak. Silence becomes their shield. Composure becomes their armor. Observation becomes their language. But all shields grow heavy with time. And even the quietest hearts hold a desire to be understood, softly, slowly, without demanding more than they can give. The hidden truth is this. Quiet people often feel emotions with an intensity that louder personalities rarely notice. They pick up subtle shifts, unspoken tensions, and tiny details that others miss. This sensitivity makes them thoughtful, perceptive, gentle, but it also makes them vulnerable. Because when you feel everything, silence becomes the only place where the noise doesn't overwhelm you. So they retreat. Not physically but emotionally. They exist in the space between participation and withdrawal, between presence and disappearance. And though the world may never see this inner process, the quiet individual feels it every time they stand in a crowded room and realize no one truly hears the words they never say. This chapter is their recognition, the soft unveiling of a loneliness hidden not in empty rooms, but in rooms filled with people. Quietness does not appear out of nowhere. It grows quietly like roots beneath the surface, unseen yet holding a form. The origins are rarely dramatic. They are subtle, almost invisible, woven into the fabric of early life. A word left unsaid. A glance misunderstood. A feeling dismissed. And slowly, a child learns that silence is safer than expression. Perhaps it began in childhood. A home where voices were raised but only certain ones mattered. Where opinions were weighed but some were ignored. Where love and acceptance were conditional on compliance, on stillness, on not asking too much. In these spaces, a young mind learns that to speak freely is to risk discord, rejection, or invisibility. Or perhaps it began in school. The playgrounds, the hallways, the classrooms where social hierarchies were invisible but keenly felt. Where laughter could sting if misdirected, and attention could be both prize and punishment. Some children quickly realize, blending in keeps them safe. Observing keeps them safe. Silence becomes a skill honed out of necessity, not choice. Early experiences of judgment, ridicule, or neglect teach lessons that endure. They shape a quiet vigilance, a careful calibration of voice, gesture, and presence. The child learns, I am safer when I do not fully exist in the eyes of others. And so the habit of retreat takes root. It is neither weakness nor rebellion. It is adaptation. Family dynamics often reinforce this pattern. A child who is naturally sensitive may notice tensions adults prefer to ignore. A parent's disappointment, a sibling's harsh words, or a caregiver's absent attention, all become cues to withdraw. The quiet child internalizes a message. Emotions are to be contained. Thoughts are to be measured. Presence is to be moderated. And with repetition, the habit transforms into a subtle shield, one that protects against pain but also isolates from joy. Even positive experiences can shape quietness. Praise for being well-behaved or thoughtful teaches that calmness is rewarded. Being described as polite or mature for their age can feel like approval, yet it subtly communicates. Restraint is virtue, assertiveness is risk. So the quiet person learns early that to exist peacefully, one must shrink just enough to avoid disruption. By adolescence, this silent architecture is often complete. The individual knows instinctively how to navigate social spaces without drawing attention, how to observe without being observed. Their inner world grows richer than their outer expression, filled with unspoken thoughts and unseen emotions. Yet this inner richness is accompanied by an unacknowledged cost, the feeling that one's truest self cannot fully inhabit the spaces one occupies. This is where loneliness quietly begins. Not as a dramatic wound, but as a quiet echo of absence. It is the recognition that the self exists, yet remains unseen. The voice is alive but the world seldom listens. The emotions are intense, yet they circulate in private. And even amidst care or affection, there is a persistent distance, an invisible wall formed by years of learning that being quiet keeps one safe. Silence, once a protective measure, becomes a constant companion. It is a friend in some ways, shielding from scrutiny, shielding from pain. But it is also a barrier, separating the individual from intimacy, from spontaneity, from full participation in life. And so the quiet person carries two realities simultaneously, an inner world of vivid thoughts and feelings, and an outer world where presence is measured, controlled, and often overlooked. This chapter is about roots, the places where silence was first learned, where protection became loneliness, where quietness was not chosen, but cultivated as a means of survival. Here lies the origin of the hidden ache, the beginning of a journey that will ripple quietly through every crowded room, every half-spoken conversation, every attempt to belong without exposure. Silence is not merely habit. It is a complex interplay of mind, body, and environment, a rhythm that the brain composes long before words are spoken. For those who remain quiet in crowds, withdrawal is often instinctual, almost automatic, a subtle survival strategy honed over years of observation. It is not laziness nor lack of interest. It is a deeply human response to a world that can feel overwhelming, unpredictable, or indifferent. Scientific understanding tells us that social sensitivity varies widely. Some brains are naturally attuned to subtle cues, changes in tone, facial expression, or body language. The quiet individual senses emotional shifts long before others do. This heightened awareness allows them to navigate social landscapes with caution, but it comes at a cost: overstimulation. Crowds, chatter, and constant interaction can feel like a tide too strong to resist. Withdrawing becomes a way to survive the flood, to maintain internal equilibrium. Neuroscience shows that such withdrawal is linked to self-regulation systems in the brain. The prefrontal cortex evaluates risk and social reward. The amygdala detects potential threat or judgment. When the signals of overstimulation rise, the body responds with subtle tension. Heart rate quickens, muscles tighten, attention narrows. The instinct is not to flee physically but to retreat inwardly. Silence becomes the safest space. Emotionally, the quiet person often oscillates between longing and apprehension. They want connection yet fear intrusion. They crave being seen, yet hesitate at the vulnerability it requires. Even small missteps, speaking too loudly, revealing too much, or drawing attention, can trigger anxiety. So restraint is learned. Control becomes a protective mechanism. And over time, withdrawal becomes second nature. A quiet conversation with oneself in a world that is louder, faster, and often less gentle. Psychology also identifies patterns in temperament and personality. Highly sensitive individuals, introverts, and those prone to rumination are naturally inclined to internal reflection rather than external expression. They process experiences deeply, often replaying social interactions in their minds long after they occur. This inward focus enhances empathy and insight, but it also reinforces a feeling of separateness. They are present yet slightly removed, engaged yet observing. The paradox is stark. Withdrawal does not signal disinterest. It signals attention, deliberation, and care. But the social world often misreads this attentiveness as aloofness, shyness, or indifference. The quiet individual becomes an enigma to others, reinforcing the sense of being unseen. This misunderstanding deepens the inner solitude, creating a quiet feedback loop where silence breeds distance, and distance reinforces silence. Yet there is nuance. Withdrawal is not an absence of emotion, intelligence, or engagement. It is an adaptive strategy. It is the body and mind negotiating boundaries in spaces that do not always feel safe. It is a subtle skill of listening, processing, and surviving, one that is often invisible yet profoundly intricate. And though it appears as stillness on the surface, beneath it flows a current of rich internal life, emotional awareness, and quiet observation. The psychology of withdrawing shows us a delicate truth. Silence is never empty. It carries thought, sensitivity, and perception. It is a protective shell, but also a vessel for understanding. Within it lives both vulnerability and wisdom, fear and insight, isolation and connection, all intertwined. Understanding this is the first step toward empathy. It is a recognition that those who stay quiet in crowds are not absent. They are fully present, only in ways that the world must learn to notice. And in noticing, the first bridge toward connection begins to form. Within the quiet person lies a conflict few can witness. It is not the loud argument of two voices clashing, nor the visible struggle of obvious tension. It is subtle, almost invisible, a tug-of-war between longing and restraint, between being present and remaining unseen. Every interaction, every group gathering, every casual conversation carries an invisible weight. A choice must be made, to step forward, risking exposure, or to step back, preserving safety. This internal struggle is continuous. Even in moments of calm, it hums quietly in the background, shaping posture, gaze, and speech. The quiet individual senses that the wrong word or gesture could disrupt the fragile equilibrium of acceptance they have cultivated. And so they hesitate, measuring each syllable, each movement, each glance. Each decision is filtered through an inner dialogue that rarely rests. Will I be seen the right way? Will I be noticed without being judged? Will I matter if I speak? The tension is not merely intellectual. It courses through the body. A tightening of the chest, a flutter in the stomach, a subtle alertness of muscles, eyes, and senses. Every smile, every nod, every laugh carries a careful calibration of risk and reassurance. Even joy is moderated, tempered, quietly rationed. The quiet person often experiences guilt and self-doubt. They question themselves for not speaking, for not contributing, for not asserting themselves. Yet speaking too freely, even internally acknowledged, can trigger anxiety. They know, on some level, that each word carries weight that can be too heavy, too revealing, too exposing. And so silence becomes both a shield and a prison. The conflict deepens when desire for connection arises. They notice the warmth of others, the ease of laughter, the intimacy of shared thoughts, and they ache for participation. Yet each attempt feels like stepping onto thin ice. Will they slip? Will they be misread? Will the fragile trust they have built evaporate with one misplaced word? So they retreat inward, observing but not joining, participating but not claiming space. The very act of wanting to connect becomes a source of tension, because desire collides with fear, and both are equally strong. This inner battle is compounded by the world's assumptions. The quiet person is often perceived as content, even cheerful, or as naturally untroubled by social complexities. But these assumptions miss the emotional labor required to appear so composed. Every measured smile, every silent nod, every understated laugh is the product of negotiation between inner longing and self-protection. Few recognize the cost of this constant vigilance. Yet within the struggle lies subtle brilliance. This inner negotiation cultivates emotional intelligence, empathy, and deep understanding. The quiet individual learns to perceive nuances invisible to others. They sense tension, harmony, joy, and sorrow, often before anyone else does. Their silence, though costly, allows them to process the world with a clarity and depth few attain. The battle is quiet, continuous, and deeply human. It is the war waged not in the open, but in the folds of thought, in the chambers of feeling, in the hidden corridors of identity. It is fought in moments of longing and hesitation, in laughter held back, in opinions left unspoken. And though it leaves scars invisible to the outside world, it shapes a mind capable of seeing more, feeling more, and understanding more than most. The quiet person's inner conflict is a testament to resilience, sensitivity, and care. It is not weakness. It is survival. It is a quiet art of navigating the tension between presence and protection. And in this struggle, unseen, unacknowledged, yet profoundly felt, lies the very heart of the loneliness that lingers in crowds. Change does not arrive like a storm. It arrives quietly, in the soft, almost imperceptible movements of a heart that has long learned to stay small. For those who remain quiet in crowds, the moment of shift is rarely dramatic. It is not a revelation that shouts. It is a gentle opening, a quiet crack in the wall of solitude, a subtle recognition that the world may see them, just enough, just once. Sometimes it begins with another person. A glance that lingers, an unhurried smile, a question asked with genuine curiosity rather than casual politeness. These small gestures, seemingly insignificant, ripple through the quiet mind like light through still water. The realization comes softly: I am noticed. I am acknowledged. My presence matters. And in that instant, the tight control over thoughts and speech loosens just enough to allow the self to emerge. Other times, it is an internal shift. A memory, a thought, a fleeting awareness that the inner world, so rich, so vivid, so alive, deserves to be expressed. A quiet voice within whispers, it is safe to exist. It is safe to be heard. This whisper grows stronger with repeated attention, until the walls that once contained their being begin to soften. The person realizes that silence need not be permanent. It is a choice, not a necessity. The moment of shift often carries ambivalence. There is excitement, yes, but also fear. Fear that the world will misunderstand, that old patterns will resist, that exposure will bring judgment. The mind negotiates internally: is this the right time? Am I prepared? Will they see me clearly or merely what I allow them to see? And yet, even amidst hesitation, a small courage takes root, a willingness to risk visibility to test the fragile bridge between self and world. In these moments, the quiet individual begins to speak, subtly at first. A comment here, a question there, a hand lifted for acknowledgement. Each act is deliberate, careful, yet infused with a gentle audacity. The voice is not loud. It is not forceful. But it is unmistakably present. The shift often triggers a cascade of realization. The individual sees, perhaps for the first time in years, that connection is not only possible but attainable. That being quiet does not mean being invisible. That expression, even cautious or small, can create a space for understanding, recognition, and intimacy. It is a fragile awakening but profound in its quietness. This moment can arrive anywhere: a classroom, a meeting, a social gathering, or even in solitude. It does not demand external validation. Often, the realization is enough on its own. It is the first step toward acknowledging the hidden longing that has shaped decades of restraint. And while the shift may seem minor to outsiders, to the quiet person it is monumental, a door gently creaking open after years of silence. The shift does not erase fear. It does not dissolve habit. It does not immediately heal loneliness, but it offers possibility. It illuminates the path toward self-recognition, toward careful engagement, toward the understanding that silence is not a permanent sentence. The moment something shifts is fragile, subtle, and deeply human. It is a quiet rebellion against patterns learned long ago. A small step toward self-presence. A tentative claim to existence that has long been muted. And in that small, luminous opening, the quiet individual discovers what has always been true: that to exist quietly is not to be insignificant, and to speak softly is still to matter profoundly. Emerging from silence is not a single act. It is a slow, deliberate process, a patient negotiation between fear and desire, between habit and intention. For those who have long remained quiet in crowds, learning to occupy space is less about speaking loudly and more about allowing the self to exist fully, gently, and without apology. It begins with awareness. The quiet individual recognizes the patterns that have shaped decades of restraint. The automatic withdrawal, the careful observation, the constant weighing of risk. They see how these patterns were protective once, but now act as barriers, separating them from connection, from joy, from simple presence. Awareness is the first key. To name the habit is to loosen its grip, to acknowledge it is to invite change. From awareness comes experimentation. Small acts of presence, a softly spoken thought, a hand extended in greeting, a pause in silence to contribute, become exercises in courage. The individual tests boundaries, learning which spaces feel safe and which require continued vigilance. Mistakes may happen. Misunderstandings may arise. And yet, each attempt, each small claim to space, carries the quiet thrill of self-recognition. I am here. I exist. I have a voice. Learning to occupy space is not about dominating attention. It is not about performance or force. It is about allowing presence without fear, about inhabiting one's body and mind without apology. It is about listening to internal cues and trusting the judgment that has been honed over years of careful observation. It is about stepping forward while remaining true to the sensitivity that once made silence necessary. The process is gradual. It is punctuated by reflection, self-doubt, and occasional retreat. There are days when old habits return, when withdrawal feels safer than engagement, when silence seems easier than expression. Yet each return is temporary. The quiet individual has begun to practice a new rhythm, one that blends observation with participation, caution with courage, restraint with acknowledgement. Relationships shift as a result. When the quiet person allows themselves to occupy space, others respond, sometimes with surprise, sometimes with warmth, sometimes with newfound respect. They begin to experience reciprocity, the give and take of presence that previously felt out of reach. Connection no longer requires perfect timing or complete invisibility. Instead, it grows from subtle engagement, genuine expression, and the willingness to be seen as one is. Occupying space also means reclaiming internal territory. The quiet individual learns to honor thoughts and feelings once locked away. They allow themselves to reflect without self-criticism, to feel without suppression, to exist without the constant shadow of judgment. The inner dialogue shifts from caution to curiosity, from restraint to gentle assertion, from survival to presence. And slowly, the loneliness that once accompanied crowds begins to loosen. It does not disappear entirely, some echoes of old habits remain, but it transforms. It becomes a quiet companion rather than a weight, a reminder of sensitivity rather than a barrier to life. Space is no longer something to shrink from. It is something to inhabit with grace, with awareness, and with calm courage. Learning to occupy space is a quiet art, one that takes patience, trust, and resilience. It is the journey from being seen as silent to being understood as present. It is the subtle reclamation of self, an acknowledgement that visibility is not danger, expression is not risk, and quietness need not mean absence. In these small, deliberate steps, the quiet person discovers what has always been true, that silence and presence are not opposites. They are rhythms of the same life, different expressions of the same inner awareness. And to move gently between them is to inhabit the world fully, softly, profoundly. The journey of the quiet individual does not end with mere participation. It culminates in a gentle return to the self, a recognition that silence, observation, and careful retreat were never failures, but steps along a long path toward self-presence. The process is not abrupt. It is quiet, tender, and often imperceptible to the outside world. Yet within, it is profound. The soft return to self begins with acceptance. The individual acknowledges the years of silent survival, the patterns of withdrawal, the careful modulation of presence. They do not condemn these habits nor wish them undone. They understand now that silence was not weakness, and restraint was not surrender. It was adaptation, protection, and intelligence. And with this understanding comes compassion for oneself, a deep, unhurried permission to exist fully. In this stage, boundaries are respected but gently expanded. The quiet person allows themselves to be heard, not out of obligation or performance, but from a place of quiet confidence. They speak when it matters. They listen when it matters. They engage without losing themselves, understanding that presence does not require dominance, and expression does not demand overexposure. The inner dialogue softens. Years of careful self-monitoring, necessary once, give way to trust. Thoughts are allowed to flow without judgment. Emotions are allowed to surface without fear. The individual learns that to occupy space is not to betray caution, but to honor their own existence. The mind, once tense and vigilant, becomes a calm companion. The body, once braced against scrutiny, moves with quiet ease. And the heart, once guarded, learns again the rhythm of gentle belonging. Connection deepens naturally. Those who were once distant now approach not because the quiet person has changed for them, but because they have returned to themselves. Friendships, family bonds, and intimate moments are no longer filtered entirely through self-protection. They are shared experiences, nurtured by presence, awareness, and patience. And in these spaces, the loneliness that once lingered in crowds begins to soften, replaced by quiet intimacy, a form of connection that does not overwhelm but embraces. The soft return to self also carries reflection. The quiet individual sees their journey with clarity, noticing how patterns formed, how sensitivity became strength, how withdrawal became wisdom. They understand the delicate balance between retreat and engagement, between observation and expression, between silence and speech. And in this awareness they find peace. The weight of invisibility lifts, replaced by the calm certainty that being present even gently is enough. And finally, there is beauty in quietness. The world may still mistake stillness for absence. Crowds may not always notice, and conversations may still pass without full acknowledgement. But the quiet individual knows something deeper. Silence is not emptiness, nor is observation insignificance. It is attentiveness, insight, and depth. It is the capacity to see, to feel, and to understand at levels often missed by the loudest voices. The soft return to self is not a return to noise, nor a surrender to external expectations. It is the gentle integration of inner life with outer presence, the reconciliation of past restraint with present courage. It is a state of being that honors sensitivity while embracing participation, reflection while accepting visibility, caution while allowing joy. And in this state, the quiet person walks into a crowd differently. They are still silent at times, still observant, still reflective. Yet now their silence is a choice, not a shield. Their presence is a calm assertion, a soft declaration. I exist. I am here. I am enough. In the end, the hidden loneliness fades, not because the world has changed, but because the individual has returned home to themselves. And in that home there is no rush, no demand, no fear. Only quiet acceptance. Only depth. Only the soft, luminous presence of a self fully reclaimed.